Princess Valera of the Cathari Empire lived inside a world that had never hurt her. Her palace floated above a calm, glowing ocean, held in the sky by ancient machines older than memory. The floors were smooth and warm. The air smelled of flowers grown only for beauty, never for food. Music drifted softly from the walls, changing with her mood. Every need was met before she could even speak it. Valera had never walked barefoot on sharp ground. She had never gone hungry. She had never been afraid. From the highest balcony, she often watched the stars and wondered why everyone else seemed so serious about them. The Cathari Empire was at war. It always was, but war to Valera was nothing more than glowing maps and calm voices. Advisors stood in tall halls, pointing at moving symbols. Ships were lost. Numbers changed. Enemies advanced, then retreated. When battles ended, the screens turned dark. And dinner was served. No screams followed the reports. No blood stained the marble floors. So Valera believed war was something distant, something clean. She was wrong. The day the humans arrived, the palace felt different. They did not arrive with bright banners or elegant greetings. Their ships were dark, scarred, and uneven. When they landed, the air felt heavy, as if the palace itself was holding its breath. Valera watched from above as the human soldiers marched out. They moved in tight formation. Their armor was scratched, burned, and repaired many times. Their faces were hard, tired, and alert. They did not admire the palace. They did not smile. They looked like people who expected danger even in paradise. Valera leaned forward, curious. Then she saw him. One human soldier stood slightly apart from the others. He was tall but walked with a stiffness, like his body remembered pain even when there was none. His armor sleeve was rolled up, revealing skin covered in long, twisted scars, not small marks, not clean lines. These scars were deep, ugly, real. Valera felt her chest tighten. She had never seen scars like that before. Her guards noticed her interest. One of them spoke softly. "Princess, the humans are here as allies. There is no need for concern." "I am not concerned," Valera replied. "I am curious." The human soldier sensed her gaze and looked up. For a moment, their eyes met. He did not bow. He did not smile. He simply nodded once. Respectful but distant. Something about that nod unsettled her. Later that day, Valera surprised everyone by making a request. "I want one of the human soldiers assigned as my escort," she said. The court fell silent. Her advisors protested. Her royal guards bristled with offense. A princess did not need a foreign soldier to protect her, especially not one from a species known for violence. Valera did not argue. She only repeated herself, "I want him." So it was done. The human soldier introduced himself with a short bow. "Sergeant Daniel Cross, Human Expeditionary Forces." His voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. Valera walked through the palace gardens with Daniel following 3 steps behind her. She tried to enjoy the glowing trees and singing water, but her eyes kept drifting to his scarred arm. Finally she spoke. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Daniel stopped walking. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "How did it happen?" She asked, "Which one?" He replied. She turned, confused. "There are many." He nodded. "Most of them." Valera swallowed. "Why were you not healed?" Daniel looked at the palace, at the perfect walls and shining towers. "I was healed," he said quietly. "This is what healing looks like when you survive." The word survive echoed in her mind. That night, as Valera lay in her soft bed, she could not sleep. She kept seeing those scars, and for the first time in her sheltered life, Princess Valera wondered what kind of world could carve such marks into a living being. And keep going anyway. The next morning, Princess Valera found herself walking again through the gardens. Daniel crossed 3 steps behind her as usual. She could not stop staring at him. The scars on his arm were more than just marks, they were stories written on skin. Stories she had never read, stories she had never imagined. "Why do you have so many?" she asked finally, her voice softer than she intended. Daniel stopped and turned slightly, giving her a careful glance. "Because I have fought," he said simply. "And I have survived. That is what scars are for." Valera frowned. She had never thought of surviving as something that left marks. Survival, in her world, was just numbers on a screen. Ships lost. Enemy retreat. Victory achieved. She had never imagined it as something painful, something personal. "Do all humans fight like this?" she asked. Daniel shrugged. "Some do. Some hide. Some die before anyone notices. It depends on the choices you make." Valera walked a few steps in silence, trying to imagine such choices. She could not. Her life had always been carefully directed. Decisions had been made for her. Danger had been avoided, shielded, or erased before it could touch her. She had never stood in a place where the wrong choice could cost her life, or someone else's. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked. Daniel's eyes darkened for a moment, just enough for her to notice. "Every day," he admitted. "But fear doesn't stop us. We learn to act anyway. We keep moving, because if we don't, someone else suffers." Valera shivered. The words settled heavily in her chest. She had never thought about anyone standing in front of her, protecting her life, putting their own in danger. She had only known soft floors and warm lights. She had never known fear, and now she was beginning to understand it just by standing near him. "Have you lost friends?" she asked quietly. Daniel nodded. He did not look at her as he answered. "Too many. Sometimes it happens in one moment. One explosion, one bullet, and they are gone. All the laughter, the planning, the jokes, they vanish." Valera looked away. Her chest felt tight. She had read about soldiers dying on distant planets, numbers flashing on her screens, but she had never realized it meant a life had ended in a single second, leaving behind emptiness. The palace was so perfect, so endless, and yet outside, there were lives shattered in the blink of an eye. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. Daniel paused, as if he had not expected her to ask. Then he said, "Yes, it hurts. And sometimes it doesn't go away." She wanted to look away, but could not. She wanted to run to her soft bed, to forget what she had learned, but her curiosity held her in place. Every scar, every worn piece of armor, every tired movement spoke of a life she could never have imagined, a life filled with danger, loss, courage, and sacrifice. Valera realized she had been wrong to think war was a story told from a distance. War was alive. It breathed in Daniel's armor, moved in the lines of his face, lingered in his scars. And she had never experienced it. She had never truly known what it meant to face a world that could take everything away. "You have seen things. Terrible things," she said softly. "And you are still standing." Daniel looked at her, his jaw tight. "Because someone has to. Because someone has to stand in front of what others cannot face. And sometimes that someone is human, or alien, or any being who refuses to move aside." Valera felt a lump in her throat. She had never thought of herself as someone worth protecting. She had only thought of comfort, beauty, and safety. And now she realized that people like Daniel Cross were willing to bleed for someone like her. "Do you ever wish?" she began, then stopped. She did not know what to ask. She could not understand how anyone could wish away the scars or the losses. To erase them would erase the courage. And courage, she now realized, was something far more powerful than the soft songs of her palace walls. Daniel studied her quietly. "What?" he finally asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. I'm learning," she said. He nodded once. No words were needed. They continued to walk in silence, the gardens quiet except for the soft glow of flowers swaying. And Valera understood, for the first time, that she had begun to see the world differently. It was not perfect, it was not clean, it was not safe, but it was alive. And in that life, some people chose to face pain so others could live. Valera looked at Daniel again. His armor was scratched. His arm was scarred. His eyes were tired. And yet, he was stronger than anyone she had ever known, not because of strength or beauty, but because of the courage that came from surviving. She did not speak for the rest of the walk. She only watched, and for the first time, she wondered what it truly meant to stand in front of danger, unflinching, and not move. Something inside her had shifted. The princess who had known only silk and safety was beginning to see the scars of the world, and she knew she could never go back to ignorance. And in that realization, a spark of respect, curiosity, and something far deeper, something she had never named, took root in her heart. The calm of the palace shattered without warning. Valera was walking through the main hall, her hands brushing against smooth walls when the first tremor hit. The floor shook beneath her feet. A distant roar became a blast of sound that echoed through the towers. Crystal chandeliers wobbled. Glass windows rattled. Servants screamed and ducked. Valera froze, her breath caught in her throat. She had never felt anything like this. Even her most daring imagination could not have prepared her for the violent chaos that shook her perfect world. "Princess!" A guard shouted, but his voice was lost in the roar. Daniel Cross was already moving. His body was a machine of instinct. He grabbed Valera's wrist, strong and firm, and pulled her toward the nearest corridor. "Down!" he shouted, his voice steady over the noise. She stumbled, barely catching herself as glass shattered around them. Cold shards rained from a broken window, sparkling like deadly stars. Her hands and face were cut by the edges, and pain shocked her like a living thing. Daniel shielded her with his own body, crouching low, his armor absorbing what could have been lethal blows. His left arm, the one scarred and twisted from battles past, stretched to cover her as though it had been built for that very moment. Valera's heart pounded. She had never been this close to death. Screens and stories had never shown her the fear in a dying soldier's eyes. She looked at Daniel, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning every corner, and understood for the first time what courage looked like. "Keep moving," he barked. She followed him blindly, the halls trembling with the force of explosions from outside. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. The scent of burning metal and wood reached her nose. She could hear screams and shouts, and for the first time, she realized that the world she had lived in was fragile. Her palace, her comfort, her life, everything could be torn away in an instant. An enemy soldier appeared suddenly from the smoke. He raised a weapon, aiming directly at Valera. Daniel reacted without hesitation. His movement was precise, practiced. He fired, dropping the attacker before he could strike, but not before taking a heavy blow to the side. He fell to one knee, grunting with pain. "Sergeant!" Valera cried, panic twisting her voice. He pressed a hand to the wound, blood spreading quickly through his fingers. Warm, thick, real blood. Valera had seen numbers on screens, numbers of dying humans and aliens. She had never touched blood like this. "I'm fine," he said, gritting his teeth. But she knew it was a lie. The guards were scattered, some dead, some wounded. The medics were nowhere to be seen. The corridors were filled with smoke and fallen debris. Valera realized she was utterly unprepared to act. She had been told that a princess was protected at all times. Now there was no one to protect her except this scarred human soldier. "Tell me what to do," she shouted over the roar of the palace's destruction. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, surprise flashing in his eyes. Then he gave her a simple order. "Apply pressure to the wound. Don't let go. Keep him alive." Valera's hands trembled as she pressed them to his side. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and sticky. She gagged, choking on fear and disgust, but she did not pull away. I'm ruining your uniform," she whispered. Daniel's lips curved into a faint, grim smile. "First time?" he asked. She nodded, barely able to speak. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized that this was what life outside her palace meant. Pain, fear, survival. They waited in silence, broken only by distant explosions and the creak of falling metal. Every sound made Valera jump. Every groan from Daniel made her stomach twist. Yet she held her hands steady, her heart pounding, because she had been told to stand. And for the first time, she understood what it meant to rely on someone completely. Not because of their rank or their title, but because they had chosen to stand in front of danger when everyone else could run. The palace shook again, a massive explosion rocking the hall nearby. Dust and debris rained down around them. Daniel pressed himself closer, protecting her as much as his injury allowed. Valera leaned into him, instinctively, because for the first time, she knew what it felt like to trust someone fully, and in that moment, as the world burned around them, Valera saw the truth she had never wanted to see. Her life of silk and light had been a bubble, fragile and hollow. Real life, dangerous, bloody, unrelenting, was not clean. It did not care about titles or palaces, but humans. Daniel Cross. They stood anyway. The palace had become a storm of smoke, fire, and screaming. Valera pressed herself against a shattered wall, her chest heaving, every breath tasting of dust and fear. Daniel Cross was kneeling beside her, his armor scorched and dented, his left arm scarred and trembling from a blow he had barely survived. Blood ran down his side, soaking through his uniform. He did not cry out, but every movement betrayed pain. Valera stared, frozen. This was not a map, not a story, not a screen she could turn off. This was real. Real blood, real danger, real suffering. An enemy soldier appeared, emerging from the smoke like a shadow. His weapon raised, eyes cold. Daniel reacted instantly, but the attack was brutal. The enemy's strike grazed Daniel's shoulder, sending him sprawling forward. Valera's instinct screamed at her. She wanted to run, to hide, to melt back into the palace walls, but she could not. She could not leave him. "Sergeant!" she shouted, her voice raw with panic. He groaned and pressed a shaking hand to the wound on his side. Blood pooled under his fingers, warm and sticky. Valera felt bile rise in her throat. She had never held blood before, never pressed life back into a living being. Her fingers shook violently, but she remembered his voice from earlier, steady and commanding. "Survive. Stand. Don't move. Do something," she screamed. "Tell me what to do." Daniel looked at her, pain etched into his features. Then, surprisingly, he smiled faintly. "You, hold it. Keep it there. Pressure. Don't stop." Valera pressed her hands firmly against his side, panic and determination mixing inside her. The blood ran between her fingers, sticky and hot. She wanted to pull away, to cry, to collapse, but she did not. She held him. The enemy soldier advanced again, but Daniel's reflexes kicked in. He grabbed a nearby piece of fallen metal, swung it to knock the attacker back, and gave Valera a quick nod. "Cover me," he said through gritted teeth. Her heart thundered, but she nodded. She picked up a fallen shard of crystal from the floor, unsure what good it would do, but determined not to stand idle. The enemy hesitated, seeing her courage, seeing the resolve in her eyes. Daniel used the moment to drag himself a few steps back toward a safer corridor. Valera followed, still pressing her hands to his wound. Her arms burned, her skin scraped from falling debris, but she did not let go. Every step was a battle between fear and determination. Every second, Daniel's life depended on her willingness to act. "Princess." "Steady, breathe," he said, his voice faint but commanding. Valera did not know if she could. She had never felt such fear, such urgency, such responsibility. Her hands were shaking, her heart racing, But she drew on a courage she had never known she possessed. She realized then, courage was not born from comfort. It was born from choice. It was born from standing when all the world wanted you to run. Hours or maybe minutes passed. The palace roared with fire and explosions. Dust filled the corridors. The smell of metal and blood mixed with smoke. And through it all, Valera held Daniel's life in her hands. She pressed harder, adjusted her grip, whispered words of encouragement. Not for herself, but for him. For life. Finally, when the sounds of battle shifted to distant echoes, Daniel slumped against her, exhausted but alive. Valera's hands were soaked in blood, her uniform ruined, her body trembling from adrenaline. She looked at him, and for the first time, she understood fully the weight of survival, the price of standing in front of danger, the price humans like Daniel had paid again and again for others. She did not wipe the blood from her hands. She stared at them, staring at the proof that she had been part of something real, something alive. She had survived fear. She had pressed life back into a wounded man. And she had learned that bravery was not about titles or armor. It was about choice, sacrifice, and Daniel looked at her. Pain in his eyes, but respect there too. "You did good," he said, voice weak but steady. Valera shook her head, tears streaking through the soot on her face. "No, you did good. I just held on." He smiled faintly, bloodied but alive. And in that moment, Valera knew the palace, her life of comfort, her world of perfection, would never feel the same again. She had seen what it meant to fight, to bleed, to survive. She had felt the weight of responsibility and learned that courage was contagious, passing from one person to another, even across species, even across worlds. And she had a new understanding. To lead, to protect, to stand in the face of danger. That was the truest measure of a life well lived. The smoke had begun to clear, but the palace still trembled from the echoes of destruction. Walls were cracked, floors littered with debris, and a faint smell of burning lingered in the air. Valera knelt beside Daniel Cross, her hands still, pressed against his wound, her body shaking from exhaustion. Every breath he took was ragged. Every blink seemed to take effort, yet he tried to reassure her with a weak smile. "You did." "Well," he said. Valera shook her head, tears streaking her soot-covered face. "No, I didn't. You survived." I just held on." Daniel's eyes softened. "Holding on is what matters. You kept me alive. That's all that counts." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of distant fire and falling debris filled the silence. Each one a reminder that the battle was not over, even if the worst had passed. Valera's mind was spinning. She had never felt so helpless, so responsible, so alive. The reality of war, the chaos, the blood, the fear was no longer something she could imagine from afar. It was inside her, pressing against her chest. Why do you do this?" she asked finally, voice trembling. "Why put yourself in danger over and over, knowing it could end like this?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength to answer. "Because if we don't, someone else dies. Someone who cannot protect themselves. Someone like you. Someone who has never had to face what I face every day." Valera swallowed hard, understanding now what he meant. She had lived all her life in a palace of safety, her hands clean, her feet soft, her world untouched by suffering. She had thought she understood bravery, but she had never truly known it until this human had risked everything to keep her alive. Hours passed as they waited in the rubble-strewn corridor. Valera pressed firm pressure on Daniel's wound, trying to follow every instruction he murmured. Her hands were red and raw from blood and soot, but she refused to let go. She whispered words to him, small comforts she did not know he needed, telling stories of the glowing gardens, the palace music, even her favorite dishes. She tried to make him laugh, even though both of them knew the cost of a smile in this place. Do humans always survive like this? She asked quietly, her forehead pressed to his shoulder. Daniel let out a weak chuckle. No, some don't. That's why we try. That's why we stand. Every time someone survives, it's because someone else refused to move. Refused to let them die alone. Valera's heart ached. She understood then that courage was not about winning or numbers on a screen. It was about sacrifice. It was about standing firm when everything inside you screams to run. It was about choosing to be the shield, not the passenger. Through the haze of pain, Daniel spoke again. You're stronger than you think, Princess. Most people freeze. Most people look away. But you stayed. You kept me alive. Valera's lips trembled. She had never been praised for courage before. Her life had been measured in beauty, in protocol, in comfort. Now she realized that bravery was the truest form of strength. It was not about titles or jewels. It was about actions, choices, and heart. When the medics finally arrived, scanning the hall quickly, assessing damage and injuries, Valera stepped back, still holding his hand briefly. Daniel allowed himself to be moved, but he did not leave her side entirely. He looked at her, his gaze heavy with gratitude and respect. You learned fast, he said. Most don't. Valera nodded, her chest tight. She had learned in hours what she had never known in years, that life was fragile, that courage could be born in anyone, and that sometimes the most important thing one could do was to simply hold on. As the medics took Daniel away, Valera stayed in the hallway, staring at the scarred, ruined palace. The walls had been shattered. The floors had been broken. But something inside her had shifted, rebuilt stronger than before. She had seen what it meant to survive, to fight, to bleed for someone else. She had seen the cost of standing, and it was heavier, deeper, more real than she had ever imagined. Valera knew she could never go back to being a sheltered princess. She had felt the weight of responsibility, the sting of fear, and the quiet pride of standing when it mattered most. She would carry this lesson forever, a scar on her soul, just like the scars Daniel carried on his body. The sun began to rise, casting light through the shattered windows, illuminating the palace ruins. Valera stepped forward, her hands still shaking, but her heart resolute. The world was harsh. The universe was dangerous. And yet, for the first time, she felt ready to face it, not as a princess of silk and glass, but as someone who had touched courage, blood, and survival. Days had passed since the attack, but Valera could not forget what she had seen. The palace was slowly returning to its former beauty, yet her mind remained haunted by smoke, blood, and the feel of Daniel Cross's hand in hers. She had touched life in a way she had never imagined. She had held a human soldier's life in her hands, and the weight of it had changed her forever. Valera had asked to visit Daniel in the human medical wing. The palace staff were hesitant. The doctors were unsure. Yet when she entered, she found him sitting upright, bandages covering most of his wounds, his eyes tired but alive. You shouldn't be here, Daniel said, his voice weak. I had to see you, Valera replied, stepping closer. She noticed how small he seemed without his armor, how ordinary and human he looked. Yet she also noticed the strength in his eyes, the quiet resolve that had carried him through the battle. He smiled faintly. You've seen enough blood to last a lifetime, Princess. I have seen more than blood, she said softly. I have seen courage. I have seen sacrifice. I have seen what it means to survive, to truly survive. And I have seen it in you. Daniel studied her, curiosity flickering. And how does that make you feel? Valera knelt beside him, ignoring protocol, ignoring titles. She looked him in the eyes. I feel changed. I was spoiled. I was protected. I lived in a world of comfort and music and safety. But now, I know that life is heavier, realer, more dangerous. And I know that the ones who stand in front, even when everything is broken, are the ones we should honor. Daniel nodded, a quiet pride in his gaze. You've learned fast, he said. Most people don't see the truth until it's too late. Valera shook her head. I don't want to wait. I don't want to be blind anymore. The Empire cannot only celebrate victory or numbers on a screen. We must honor the ones who bleed, who protect, who survive. And I want to learn from you. Daniel's lips curved into a small smile. That's a lesson most rulers never learn. Most see war as games, not choices. You're different. For the first time in her life, Valera felt proud not because of jewels or titles, but because of understanding. She had witnessed bravery in its purest form. She had touched it, felt it, and it had left a mark deeper than any palace decoration could ever provide. You risked yourself for me, she whispered. I was useless, and yet you did not hesitate. Why? Daniel's eyes softened. Because someone has to. Someone has to stand in front. Someone has to carry the weight so others can live. That is what humans and some others do. That is what courage is. Valera pressed a hand to his, remembering the warmth, the blood, the determination. Then I want to carry that too, she said. Not the blood, not the scars, but the choice. I want to lead in a way that honors those who survive, those who stand, those who fight for others. Daniel studied her quietly, as if measuring her heart. You're already starting, he said. Most take years to understand what you just said in minutes. The princess smiled faintly, tears threatening to fall. She had never cried for understanding before. She had cried for beauty, for music, for comfort. Now she cried for knowledge, for courage, for connection. I will not forget this, she said. I will not forget you. I will not forget the cost of standing. And I will make sure the Empire remembers it too. Daniel's gaze softened. Then perhaps your people will be stronger for it. Perhaps they will learn what courage really means. Valera stood, looking down at him, feeling smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller, because the world was bigger, harsher, and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Larger, because she now understood her place in it, not as a princess wrapped in silk and music, but as a leader who had seen what it truly meant to stand, and who had touched the life of someone brave enough to bleed for others. She left the medical wing slowly, the halls of the palace seeming different than before. The walls no longer felt like protection, they felt like a stage. The world beyond was no longer a map, no longer a story told from afar. It was a live, messy, and real dot, and for the first time, Princess Valera felt ready, not for comfort, not for safety, but for responsibility. She had learned from a human soldier what it meant to be courageous, and she would never forget it. Across the palace gardens, the sun shone brighter than before. But Valera saw not beauty alone, but potential. Potential for the Empire to understand bravery, to honor scars, to value life beyond perfection. She smiled softly. The world had changed her, and she would change the world in return. Years passed. The palace of Princess Valera had been repaired, rebuilt taller and brighter than before, yet nothing inside her remained untouched by what she had learned. The gardens glowed, the music hummed, and servants moved quietly in their tasks, but Valera walked differently now. She walked with purpose, with understanding, and with respect for the lives that had fought to keep her safe. Daniel Cross had recovered from his injuries, though the scars on his body remained. Some were deep, twisted reminders of battles fought, while others were smaller, fading lines of memory. He eventually returned to his human world, leaving the Empire behind. But he left something far more important than his presence: understanding. Valera had carried that understanding into her rule. She became Queen Valera, a leader who had seen courage up close, who had touched the blood of sacrifice, and who had witnessed what it truly meant to survive. The Empire celebrated victory differently now. Statues were raised not of perfect generals, polished soldiers, or shiny ships, but of those who had stood in front, scarred, bloodied, and unwavering. Soldiers were honored for bravery, for survival, for choices that risked everything for others. And one statue stood alone, larger than the rest, in the palace courtyard. It depicted a man, tall, scarred, kneeling, one hand outstretched as if protecting someone unseen. The plaque below reads simply, Daniel Cross, human, survivor, protector. The Lyra often walked to that statue. She touched it gently, remembering the warmth of his hand, the fear in his eyes, and the courage that had never left him, even when he bled. Humans fight differently, she said to the young leaders who accompanied her. Not because they seek glory, but because they choose to stand.